In this lesson, we're going to be learning about section functions. These are a pretty new addition to survey solutions, and they're functions which deal with an entire section of questions as opposed to an individual variable or questions themselves. There's a couple of good uses for these. The ones we'll look at today is to flag to interviewers if there's any unanswered questions within a section, and also how many unanswered questions are within each section. So let's jump in and take a look at these sections and learn how to use them. So these section functions are special functions which are going to return information about an entire section of questions rather than just individual questions. They can be used to validate, that is, make interviewers aware of where there are unanswered questions, or you can take a more stringent approach and use them to not enable the next section until all questions are answered in the existing section. Now, if you're going to go down this path, it's important to make sure that all your questions are all encompassing. So you have don't know and refuse codes in every single question. Otherwise, interviewers might be forced to press something which is not true or an answer not given by the respondent just to proceed. The first step in using these section functions is that we need to give each section a variable name so that we can reference it. That's done here when you set up your sections in the little field variable name. So the first function we'll look at today will help us to check if all relevant or enabled conditions have been answered, and that function is called isSectionAnswered. It's a pretty simple function. All we need to pass through is the section name that we want to check. And that's the variable name that we've assigned to the specific section. So we can use it, as we will today, to enable a static text error message to make the interviewer aware that they have some unanswered questions in a particular section. Or you can use it more strictly to restrict access to the next section until the current section is complete. Taking a look now in the designer at lesson 7, what I like to do with these warnings about the section completeness is to display them all on the end page. So when the interviewer comes to the end of the survey and is going to put in the result, I like to display these error messages just before that so they can go back and answer anything that's been left out before finalizing their interview. So what I've got here, first of all, is a static text that I want to display if there's any missing answers in section 3. The first thing I need to do is go back to section 3 and assign it a variable name. So I'm going to call it sec3. So now, back in my warning message, I can display this warning using the is not equals to is section answered section 3. So this exclamation point at the start makes it the opposite. So if the entire section of section 3 is not answered, then we only get this warning message. The other thing we can do with our isSectionAnswered function is restrict the next section. So what I would do here is go to the next section, section 4, and I'm not going to enable it until section 3 is fully answered. Let's take a test and see how these work. We can see straight away that lesson 4 is not yet enabled, and when we come to our lesson 7 function, our error message is displaying, telling us there's something missing in section 3. So as I go back to section 3, if I put in the date, then we see that now section 4 is enabled as we've completed everything in section 3, and also our error message has been hidden. The second function in today's lesson will return for us the number of unanswered questions. And this function is unsurprisingly called number unanswered questions. And the same as our previous one, all we need to pass through is that section name that we want to reference. So it's a helpful function, particularly if you have very long sections, rather than just telling the interviewers that a question was missed. You can tell them how many, so they know how many to look for when they go back. You can see also a couple of additional functions which we won't cover in detail, but these are called the enable questions count, tells you how many questions are enabled in that section, and enabled answered questions count, how many of those have been answered. Because our function to return the number of unanswered questions is going to send us back an integer number, I've created a variable because we need somewhere to put this number. So it's an integer type, I'll call it missing section 3, and the expression is going to be number unanswered questions in section 3. So what I can do with this variable is pipe it back into my warning message to add a little bit more detail for our enumerators. So I can say, please review, there are currently missing sec 3, that's this variable here, questions which have not been answered. Okay, let's see how this works. So now when we're testing, our error message tells us that there is unanswered questions and how many? Currently 1 question, which there is just the 1 question in all of section 3. So it's working nicely. So there we have our lesson on section functions. They're certainly not the most difficult functions to use, but they are incredibly helpful for helping with your data completion. If you have interviewers which are prone to forget questions, or you have very, very long sections in your questionnaire, or ones that are confusing with lots of subsections, these functions are really, really helpful to flag to interviewers exactly where and how many questions they've missed.